The unknown dreamer. Before the world knew his name, before his face became the symbol of Hollywood charm, there was just a young boy named William Bradley Pitt, born on December 18, 1963, in Shawnee, Oklahoma. He wasn't born into fame, luxury, or the Hollywood spotlight. No red carpets, no cameras, no fame, just a simple, small-town boy with big dreams that no one else could see. Brad grew up in Springfield, Missouri, in a conservative, religious family. His father owned a trucking company, and his mother was a school counselor. Life was normal, maybe too normal for a kid who was secretly dreaming of movie sets and bright lights. But in that quiet town, something inside him whispered, "You're meant for something bigger." After finishing high school, Brad enrolled at the University of Missouri, majoring in journalism and advertising. Everyone thought he'd build a safe, predictable career. But just 2 weeks before graduation, something wild happened, a feeling that he couldn't ignore. He packed his old Datsun car, said goodbye to his friends, and drove straight to Los Angeles. No plan, no money, just raw ambition and a burning dream. When he arrived in LA, reality hit hard. There were thousands of dreamers just like him, all fighting for a single role. Brad didn't have connections, experience, or even a solid place to stay. He worked odd jobs to survive, driving limos for strippers, delivering refrigerators, and even dressing up as a giant chicken for a restaurant called El Pollo Loco. But behind that chicken costume, behind that wide smile, there was a man who refused to give up. Every night, he'd attend acting classes, audition for small roles, and face rejection after rejection. Yet every no only made him stronger. In those early days, no one believed that this struggling young man, covered in sweat and disappointment, would one day become one of the greatest actors of his generation. But Brad had something most people didn't: persistence. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing purpose, because deep inside, Brad knew you can't stay invisible forever if you were born to shine. And that's where his journey from zero to hero truly began. The first spark, from struggles to spotlight. Los Angeles wasn't kind to newcomers. The city was filled with dreamers, some broke, some lost, and some who simply gave up. But Brad Pitt wasn't one of them. After months of rejections, cheap apartments, and sleepless nights, he finally started landing small gigs. A guest role here, a commercial there. Nothing glamorous, but enough to keep hope alive. In 1987, Brad got tiny parts in shows like Dallas, Growing Pains, and 21 Jump Street. These were blink-and-you-miss-it appearances, but they meant the world to him. Each scene, each line, was a step closer to the dream he carried from Missouri. Behind that charming smile and golden hair, he was learning, observing, and building the foundation of the legend he would soon become. Then came 1991, the year that changed everything. Director Ridley Scott was casting for his new film Thelma and Louise. Brad auditioned for the role of a young, handsome drifter named JD. A small role, but one with unforgettable impact. And when he stepped in front of the camera, something magical happened. That short scene where he flirted and stole hearts wasn't just acting. It was the birth of a new star. Overnight, Hollywood took notice. People didn't just see an actor. They saw charisma. They saw star power. That 6-minute appearance became Brad's ticket from anonymity to attention. But fame didn't come easy. With recognition came pressure. Everyone expected him to be just another pretty face. Brad wanted more. He wanted respect, depth, and challenge. So instead of sticking to the easy road, he chose risky, complex roles. He turned down big commercial offers and focused on becoming a real artist. That decision defined him, from the guy in a chicken costume to Hollywood's newest heartthrob. Brad Pitt was now standing at the edge of something bigger, a career that could either fade away like so many before him or ignite into something extraordinary. And deep down, Brad knew the fire had just been lit. He was no longer the dreamer from Missouri. He was the man ready to take on the world, breaking the chains, choosing art over fame. After Thelma and Louise, Brad Pitt became the new obsession of Hollywood. Magazines called him the sex symbol of the 90s, and every director wanted him for romantic roles. But Brad wasn't chasing fame anymore. He was chasing meaning. He didn't want to be remembered just for his looks. He wanted to be remembered for his craft. So, while everyone expected him to play safe, Brad made a bold choice. He started taking roles that were dark, emotional, and challenging. In 1992, he starred in A River Runs Through It, directed by Robert Redford. The film wasn't about glamour. It was about humanity, struggle, and spirit. Brad's quiet, heartfelt performance made critics stop and notice. This guy could really act. Then came Legends of the Fall 1994. Brad played Tristan Ludlow, a wild, untamed soul haunted by love and loss. It was a role filled with emotion, and audiences connected deeply. People didn't just see beauty anymore. They saw pain, passion, and power. Brad's name was now being spoken in the same breath as serious actors. But he wasn't done yet. In 1995, he shocked everyone again with Seven. Opposite Morgan Freeman, gone was the charming cowboy. Now, Brad was a determined detective hunting a serial killer in one of the darkest thrillers of the decade. The ending of Seven still gives chills, and that raw emotion in his final scene proved Brad's depth as an artist. The same year, he took another leap in 12 Monkeys, a mind-bending sci-fi film. For that performance, Brad won a Golden Globe and earned his first Oscar nomination. The man once rejected in countless auditions was now being recognized as one of the finest actors in Hollywood. What made Brad different wasn't just his talent, it was his fearlessness. He wasn't afraid to fail. He wasn't afraid to surprise people. He knew that real success wasn't about being famous. It was about being authentic. From a struggling dreamer to a respected artist, Brad Pitt was no longer trying to find his place. He was creating it. The rise of a legend, stardom, love, and chaos. By the mid-1990s, Brad Pitt was no longer just a name. He was a phenomenon. His face was everywhere. His movies were dominating the box office, and his every move was followed by millions. But behind the glamour, there was a man constantly walking the tightrope between fame and fulfillment. After 7 and 12 Monkeys, Brad had proven that he wasn't just another Hollywood heartthrob. He was a powerhouse actor. The industry finally respected him, and audiences adored him. Yet, with great fame came great chaos. Paparazzi swarmed him day and night. His relationships became front-page gossip, and suddenly, the boy from Missouri had become the center of the world's attention. In 1997, Brad took another creative leap with 7 years in Tibet, showing his growing hunger for meaningful storytelling. He wasn't chasing box office numbers, he was searching for roles that fed his soul. The film stirred controversy, but also reflected his personal quest for peace and identity. Then, in 1999, came the movie that changed his legacy forever, Fight Club, playing Tyler Durden, a rebellious, philosophical character who questioned everything about modern society. Brad gave one of the boldest performances of his life. The film initially confused audiences, but later became a cult classic, turning Brad into a symbol of rebellion and depth. Lines like "It's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything" became part of pop culture history. But fame has its shadows. His marriage to Jennifer Aniston made him the golden boy of Hollywood. Yet the media pressure and lack of privacy began to suffocate him. He started questioning everything. What success really meant, what happiness truly looked like, and whether fame was worth the price of peace. Despite the glitter, Brad often said in interviews that he felt empty at times, that the world saw the star, but few saw the man. He was admired by millions, yet fighting his own inner battles. Still, one truth remained unshaken. Brad Pitt had risen from nothing to become a global icon. The boy who once wore a chicken suit was now defining what it meant to be a Hollywood legend. Love, loss, and the search for purpose. The 2000s marked both the brightest and most complicated years of Brad Pitt's life. On one side, he was a global superstar, adored, admired, and unstoppable. On the other, he was a man quietly searching for something deeper than fame, a sense of purpose. After his divorce from Jennifer Aniston in 2005, the world went into frenzy. Every tabloid, every headline, every TV show dissected his personal life. It was chaos, and yet, out of that storm, a new chapter began. That same year, he starred opposite Angelina Jolie in Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Their chemistry was electric, raw, and real, and soon fiction became reality. Brad and Angelina's relationship became one of the most talked about love stories in modern Hollywood. Together, they became a symbol of power, compassion, and beauty. But what truly defined this chapter wasn't just love. It was growth. Brad changed. He began traveling the world, engaging in humanitarian work, and building homes for victims of Hurricane Katrina through his Make It Right Foundation. Fame was no longer his mission, impact was. During this time, his career also reached new heights. He starred in Babel 2006, a film that mirrored the pain and disconnection of humanity. His performance was raw, emotional, and deeply real. Critics hailed it as one of his finest works. Then came The Curious Case of Benjamin Button 2008, a story about a man aging backward, a film that beautifully reflected Brad's own understanding of life and time. It earned him another Oscar nomination, and audiences saw a different side of him, tender, reflective, and soulful. But even as his professional life soared, his personal one was under the microscope. With 6 children and constant media attention, Brad and Angelina lived in a spotlight that never dimmed. Yet, amidst all the noise, Brad often said in interviews that fatherhood changed him. It grounded him, made him see the world through purer eyes. The man who once chased fame was now chasing meaning. He wasn't the dreamer from Missouri anymore. He wasn't even the rebel from Fight Club. Brad Pitt had evolved into a man who understood that true Greatness isn't about what you achieve, it's about who you become. The fall and the fight, when everything comes crashing down. By the mid-2010s, Brad Pitt seemed to have it all: fame, fortune, family, and respect. To the world, he was untouchable. But behind the glamorous premieres and perfect smiles, a storm was quietly building. Life, as he knew it, was about to shatter. His relationship with Angelina Jolie, once called Hollywood's royal love story, began to fall apart. Years of media pressure, lifestyle differences, and emotional strain started to crack the foundation of their marriage. In 2016, the news broke. Angelina had filed for divorce. The world was shocked. Headlines exploded, rumors spread, and suddenly, Brad, the man who once symbolized calm strength, was being painted in the darkest light. Behind closed doors, he was fighting not just for love, but for his family. Reports of arguments, custody battles, and emotional breakdowns followed him everywhere. Brad later admitted in interviews that it was one of the lowest points of his life, a time when everything he had built seemed to crumble overnight. To make matters worse, he was struggling with alcohol addiction. For years, he had masked his pain with a drink in his hand, pretending everything was fine. But after the separation, he decided to confront the truth. He quit drinking, entered therapy, and started a journey of healing. In a candid moment, Brad said, "You either deny your pain or you face it and evolve." And he chose to face it. Instead of running from his mistakes, he began rebuilding from within. He learned to be a better father, a humbler man, and a more honest human being. He cut away the noise, stayed away from the spotlight for a while, and focused on finding peace in simplicity. This wasn't the glamorous Hollywood Brad anymore. This was a man stripped of everything superficial, standing face to face with his own soul. And out of that darkness came strength. Because sometimes life breaks you not to destroy you, but to rebuild you stronger. Brad Pitt's story was no longer about stardom. It was about redemption, a comeback, reclaiming grace and greatness. After the storm, there was silence, and in that silence, Brad Pitt began to rebuild his life. No grand announcements, no flashy comebacks, just quiet, steady healing. He'd faced his demons, accepted his flaws, and learned to live with humility. And from that stillness emerged a man more grounded, more human, and more powerful than ever before. Brad started focusing again on his art, not for fame, but for expression. His comeback wasn't about proving anything to the world. It was about rediscovering himself. In 2019, he took on a deeply personal role in Ad Astra, playing an astronaut haunted by the ghosts of his past. It was a symbolic film, a story about a man lost in space, searching for connection and meaning. For Brad, it felt almost autobiographical. Critics praised his restrained, emotional performance. It was clear that his pain had transformed into art. But it was his next film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, directed by Quentin Tarantino, that reignited the world's love for him. Playing Cliff Booth, a laid-back stuntman with quiet wisdom and effortless charm, Brad delivered a performance that reminded everyone why he was special. There was humor, grace, and soul, the mark of a man who had lived, fallen, and risen again. When Brad won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in 2020, it was more than just a trophy. It was redemption. Standing on that Oscar stage, he smiled and said with humility and wit, "I'm just happy to be here." But behind those words was a journey of decades. decades. From the chicken suit in LA to Hollywood's highest honor. Off screen, he continued focusing on peace, fatherhood, and kindness. He spent time producing meaningful films through his company, Plan B Entertainment, which backed powerful stories like 12 Years a Slave, Moonlight, and The Big Short. Brad had shifted from being the face in front of the camera to the force behind it. This was Brad Pitt 2.0, wiser, calmer, and more content. The world saw the movie star, but this time, it also saw the man, one who had fallen, learned, and risen with grace. Beyond the spotlight, the legacy of a true artist. As the noise of fame began to fade, Brad Pitt found something far more powerful: peace. He no longer chased headlines or roles for attention. He had nothing left to prove and everything left to create. The boy from Missouri who once dreamed of making it big had become the man who redefined what making it truly means. In the years following his Oscar win, Brad's choice is reflected a quiet maturity. He turned his focus toward producing films that had substance, not spectacle. Through his production company, Plan B Entertainment, he began championing bold, emotional stories, films like Minari, Blonde, and Women Talking. These weren't just projects, they were statements. Brad was using his platform not for glory, but for good cinema. Off-screen, he continued to evolve as a person. He started painting and sculpting, finding solace in art that didn't require applause. Friends described him as calm, reflective, even spiritual. He once said in an interview, "I think all our heartbreaks become our teachers if we let them." That sentence summed up everything about his journey. Brad also became deeply involved in architecture and sustainable design, passions that connected him back to the earth, back to something real. Through his humanitarian work, he kept helping rebuild communities and lives, quietly and without cameras. The man once called Hollywood's most handsome actor had transformed into something much greater: a philosopher of life, an artist who understood that beauty fades, but character endures. He wasn't chasing immortality through fame anymore. He was earning it through impact. In interviews, Brad often smiled when asked about his legacy. He'd say, "If my kids think I did okay, that's enough." That humility, the ability to stay grounded despite decades of fame, became his most admirable quality. Brad Pitt had finally found the balance he'd been searching for all his life, between art and reality, between success and peace. He had gone beyond the spotlight, beyond the glamour, and stepped into timelessness. Because legends aren't made by fame, they're made by what they leave behind. The wisdom years, lessons from a life fully lived. By his late 50s, Brad Pitt wasn't just a movie star anymore. He was a man of reflection, carrying the scars and the shine of a life fully lived. He had tasted success, endured heartbreak, battled demons, and emerged softer, wiser, and more human than ever. These were not his fading years. They were his awakening years. In interviews, Brad began speaking less about fame and more about healing. He talked about the importance of forgiveness, not just toward others, but toward oneself. "We're all trying to figure life out," he once said. "No one gets it right all the time. The key is to keep learning." Those words carried the quiet strength of a man who had walked through both fire and grace. On screen, His work mirrored this maturity. In Bullet Train 2022, he showed that even action could have humor, heart, and philosophy. Fans loved his effortless cool, but behind that was something deeper. A man who had learned to laugh at life's chaos. His performances became lighter, freer, and more joyful. He wasn't acting to prove. He was enjoying the craft again. Off the screen, Brad embraced solitude. He spent time at his vineyard in France, grew closer to his children, and dedicated hours to art and architecture. He surrounded himself with creativity, not celebrity. Friends described him as more grounded than ever, a man who valued silence over attention. What stood out most during these years was Brad's honesty about vulnerability. He spoke openly about loneliness, depression, and the need for emotional growth. That honesty made people connect to him not as a star, but as a person. The world no longer admired just Brad Pitt the actor. They respected Brad Pitt the human being. He once said, "It's a beautiful thing when you realize that life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about transforming it." And that's exactly what he did. Every struggle became wisdom. Every loss became strength. Brad Pitt had evolved from a Hollywood icon into a living lesson. Proof that success means nothing without peace, and that true greatness begins when ego ends. He had mastered not just cinema, but the art of being alive. The timeless icon, the man who became a message. As the years moved forward, Brad Pitt no longer chased moments. He created them. He had lived every shade of the human experience: fame, failure, love, heartbreak, and healing. But somewhere along that winding road, the boy from Missouri became more than an actor. He became a symbol of resilience. In a world obsessed with perfection, Brad's story stood as a quiet rebellion. He showed that even the most glamorous lives are filled with battles, and that real strength isn't about hiding your pain. It's about embracing it and rising anyway. His face had aged, his eyes carried stories, and his smile now spoke peace. When people talked about Brad Pitt, they didn't just talk about Fight Club or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. They talked about his journey, the young man who once wore a chicken costume for survival had built a legacy built not on appearances, but on authenticity. He continued producing meaningful films, mentoring new artists, and using his influence to tell stories that mattered. His focus shifted from fame to legacy. Not the kind measured by awards, but the kind measured by hearts touched. Fans across generations saw in him something deeper than stardom. He was living proof that success is not a straight line. It's a series of falls, recoveries, and reinventions. Brad never let his failures define him. Instead, he used them as stepping stones toward wisdom. In his 60s, Brad radiated calmness, a man who had learned that peace is the greatest luxury. He spent time nurturing friendships, caring for his children, and finding joy in the smallest things: music, art, laughter. Fame had once built his world, but now simplicity defined it. And maybe that's what made him timeless. Because legends aren't remembered for their beauty or fame. They're remembered for the way they make others feel. Brad Pitt's story reminds the world that you don't have to be perfect to be powerful. You just have to keep going, keep growing, and never lose your heart. From a small-town dreamer to one of Hollywood's most respected figures, his journey became a message to millions. You can fall, you can break, but you can rise again, stronger, wiser, and real. That's Brad Pitt, not just a star, but a story that will never fade.